A shocking carjacking and murder in broad daylight leads to the arrest of 4. Now, months after the startling abduction, the victim's husband is also arrested, adding another twist to the case. In April, authorities made a horrific discovery: the body of 31-year-old Katherine Altagracia Guerrero de Aguasvivas. On April 11, she was driving her car when she stopped at a red light in Seminole County, Florida. While stopped at the light, an armed man held her at gunpoint and forced his way into her white Dodge Durango, which was all captured on terrifying cell phone video. The gunman, who was wearing a black hoodie and a ski mask, got out of the green Acura, which was directly behind Katherine's car. And according to the Seminole County Sheriff, at the time, the gunman appeared to be armed with an automatic handgun consistent with the 10mm.
Points directly at the driver, Katherine, tells her, "We suspect," to unlock the door, which she does. He jumps in the rear passenger seat behind the driver, and she immediately makes a U-turn.
Once the light turned green, Katherine is seen making a U-turn, and the green Acura where the gunman jumped out of is seen following closely behind.
Probably heading, speculation here, but probably heading in a direction where the suspect does not want them to go, and we suspect that he orders her to turn around again and reapproach the intersection of East Lake and Tuscola Road. At that intersection, they turn south and they're heading southbound, nearly rush hour traffic here, southbound on Tuscola Road towards the Seminole-Orange County line, all the way down to Aloma. When they get to Aloma, they make a left. They go all the way across all lanes of traffic so they can get on 417 southbound. At this time, we suspect that Katherine is still driving under the armed dictatorship of the suspect. Here's where you're going to go, here's where you're going to drive.
Investigators say Katherine was driving toward a new construction area they believe the suspects were familiar with. And nearly 2 hours after the carjacking happened, deputies were called to that exact area for a horrific update.
That was set off in a little bit of a distance, but not so far away that eyewitnesses could not report hearing gunshots and ultimately the smoke of a fire that was set ablaze, the vehicle that was set ablaze. By the time authorities with the Osceola County Sheriff's Office arrived there, there was so much damage to the vehicle, you could not positively identify the vehicle, but they also discovered that one person was deceased and found in that vehicle. Now, it's an important part here because we believe that to be the vehicle and the decedent to be Katherine, but we have to positively confirm that through the scientific method of DNA examinations and dental records. But from all accounts of looking at the scene, it looks like the vehicle and is consistent to everything that we've seen so far.
But just before the carjacking, Katherine called her husband to tell him someone had rammed into the back of her car and was following her.
About a half a mile or so prior to that intersection, she started to notice that the green Acura was behind her, and the Acura was actually ramming into her back bumper at that time. At that time, she picked up the phone and called her husband, told her husband that she was being rammed, that there was somebody there that was following her. The husband provided the advice to don't stop anywhere. There are no known reports to the sheriff's office or policing authorities made by either Katherine or the husband that we're aware of.
But during the investigation, the case would unearth several twists. Back in April, investigators were on the search for the green Acura the attackers used during Katherine's carjacking. And when investigators found the car, they believed it to be connected to the murder of Florida tow truck driver Juan Garcia, who was shot and killed on April 10th, just a day before Katherine's untimely death.
The circumstances leading up to that are one that I'll describe out now, that the car was legitimately owned by a family in Winter Springs. They sold that to a legitimate car dealership back in December. Sold the car or traded the car in. As car dealerships typically do, they traded off to an auto auction. It went to an auto auction and then ultimately was purchased by a buy here, pay here owner operator who sold it from their lot in Seminole County. They sold it. It was still titled to the original owners in Winter Springs. It had not had enough time to work out the transfer of title. And the people who purchased the car never came back to finish the additional paperwork. They still owed the person money. So the car has been out on the streets probably since February, unregistered, undocumented with a license plate. Any license plate that it had on at any given time was just temporarily put on, largely from a stolen tag. What's unique about a 2002 green Acura in the state of Florida, there were only 3 in the state of Florida. 2 had been salvaged and only 1 existed in the state. When we look at records, the first time authorities came in contact with this was when it was towed on March 19th from an Orlando apartment complex. The car was backed in, parked illegally, probably had no tag on it at the time, and it was towed from an Orange County apartment complex on March 19th. The tow truck driver of that particular tow of this vehicle was a murder victim in Orange County that happened 1 day before our kidnapping murder.
And the Seminole County Sheriff said he believed Juan Garcia and Katherine's deaths were connected. Then another turn in the case when an Orange County deputy was arrested and charged with leaking details of the investigation to Katherine's husband. Authorities say Deputy Francisco Estrella also shared information about the lead detective with Katherine's husband.
But, we know that, or we believe that they were childhood friends. Of course, there was a relationship with there. But what they had to gain is something that I'm incredibly interested in. Why would somebody do this? Why would they put their own job and life on the line to communicate with one of our detectives, to give an alias in the process? Now, he's been an Orange County deputy for 1 year, but to give an alias in the process, never knowing that Miguel, the decedent's husband, is going to release his phone. That if he didn't release the phone, I don't know we would ever know this. So this is it's incredibly frightening, and but I suspect we'll find a lot more about this as the investigation goes on.
Deputy Estrella was arrested back in April, but was granted a $15,000 bond and was released from jail. But by June, 4 suspects were arrested in connection to Katherine's murder. 21-year-old Derek Alexis Rodriguez Bonilla, 27-year-old Giovanni Crispo Hernandez, 38-year-old Jordanish Torres Garcia, and 27-year-old Kevin Ocasio Justiano all face federal charges of carjacking resulting in death, kidnapping resulting in death, and use of a firearm during and in relation to a crime of violence causing death. Torres Garcia reportedly told investigators he was the masked gunman who kidnapped Katherine and said he had been paid to kidnap her and was paid $1,500 to deliver her to someone. Meanwhile, investigators say it was Kevin Ocasio Justiano who was the driver of the green Acura who trailed behind her. According to court documents, Katherine was driving to Giovanni Crispo Hernandez's home in Castleberry, Florida, to get $170,000 in drug money. Crispo Hernandez later called Torres Garcia to organize the carjacking to get the money back. A surveillance photo showed Torres Garcia and Justiano buying lighter fluid at a local gas station on the day of her murder. Investigators also learned Kevin Ocasio Justiano met with Derek Bonilla to get the 10mm firearm that was used to kill Katherine and was the same weapon believed to be used in the murder of Juan Garcia the night before Katherine's murder. Authorities believe Katherine's murder was tied to this alleged drug trafficking ring, and months after her horrific death, her husband now faces charges of his own. Miguel Angel Aguasvivas Lizardo now faces 1 count of conspiracy to engage in money laundering. According to the indictment, Lizardo traveled to and from Orlando, Florida for the purpose of obtaining bulk cash, which was proceeds of the specified unlawful activity. Authorities both on the local and federal side have said the unlawful activity refers to their belief in a possible drug trafficking ring with connections in Central and South Florida. According to court documents, Lizardo served as a drug money courier for years between Orlando, Miami, as well as other parts of South Florida. Back in 2021, the FBI investigated a drug trafficking organization and found Lizardo had acted as a money courier for hundreds of thousands of dollars on multiple occasions. Officials say the organization was trafficking cocaine and laundering the money proceeds by purchasing cryptocurrency. According to a report by NBC Miami, in 2022, the DEA seized more than $250,000 in cash and 2 firearms from Lizardo's car. Then earlier this year, the DEA began an investigation into drug trafficking organization in Colombia and learned Lizardo and a co-conspirator had arranged money drops involving hundreds of thousands of dollars. One of those drops was supposed to happen on the day Katherine was murdered. And while Lizardo is facing a federal charge of his own, he hasn't been charged in connection to his wife's death. There are so many layers to this case, so let's bring on trial attorney and federal litigator Alexis Rosenberg to unpack this even further. Alexis, thank you so much for joining me today. I remember when this story first unfolded back in April, and the carjacking video was pretty startling to see, especially since it was in broad daylight. But what's your reaction to the victim's husband being charged not in connection to her murder, but in connection with the drug trafficking ring?
Well, what a twist and turn. I mean, I don't think any of us saw this coming. I mean, you were just feeling bad for him and having empathy for a husband that was obviously going to be grieving under these very strange circumstances.
And why do you think Miguel Aguasvivas Lizardo faced federal charges instead of state charges too?
Well, what is interesting is I am surprised with what has come out. Now, obviously, we don't have all of the facts, that he actually wasn't charged with a racketeering count along with that conspiracy to money launder, because now that we know that it's come out that there's some connection having to do with this drug ring, allegedly, I'm going to assume it was because across multiple states and international, there's some sort of connection there as why it was filed in federal court.
And how prevalent would you say drug trafficking organizations or drug trafficking rings are in South Florida? Is it a huge problem in that area?
I'm not an expert in this. However, I would say that Florida is probably pretty well known for its drug trafficking going way back. I mean, there's movies going back to the 70s about this. What is interesting is it appears that it's a connection from the allegations between Orlando and Miami. There's also some details that have come out that he allegedly was carrying money back and forth related to that trafficking of, I believe it was cocaine.
And what do you make of just the brazenness of the initial crime in the first place of Catherine Aguaviva's murder? It happened in broad daylight at a stoplight, and then this masked gunman jumps out of the car with lots of witnesses around just to allegedly retrieve this drug money bag.
Well, what's interesting about this that you brought it, it was so brazen, and it just to retrieve the bag, I'm not sure why in the end she needed to be kidnapped or murdered for that. But it definitely was brazen. And what is even more interesting about this is the fact that they ultimately surrendered. I believe they just walked in and surrendered. I don't know the circumstance behind that. But yeah, I mean, these type of things, when you're involved in criminal activity at this level, allegedly, and we're talking about this amount of money, this isn't an unusual thing to happen.
And I think another thing too that stood out to me was just how young the carjacking and murder defendants are, 21 to 27-year-olds, a 28-year-old. Are you surprised to see this level of criminal kind of organization from them, especially being so young?
If I had to guess, and we obviously don't have all the facts, they're going to come out. They're going to, as this unravels, but I would assume they were pretty low level in this organization. Probably higher up had sent these lower level, younger individuals in. They were just one part of a larger organization, and that's why we have conspiracy for money laundering charge against the husband, as well as there is an allegation of a drug ring, which would mean a larger organization, which is why I'm surprised that we don't have some sort of, more allegations specific to that, as well as the racketeering charge, other charges related to racketeering.
And since these four men are being tried in federal court, talk to me a little bit about the differences between trying a case of this magnitude, where you have different aspects of carjacking, drug money, as well, drug trafficking. Talk to me a little bit about the differences between trying this type of case in a federal court as opposed to a state court.
Well, I mean, they're similar in a lot of ways. The difference is, in my opinion, in my experience, I federal is very much more organized, much more strict about how they run their courtroom. There's a To do anything, you basically need the judge's approval. The parties just can't really agree about certain things. As well as if he's convicted and sentenced, the amount of time in federal court, they don't get as much time served, or time off for good behavior sort of credits. You really are more going to serve what you have been sentenced to. Now, some people think that federal prisons are better than others. Luckily, I have, not spent or been sentenced to time and either, so I can't tell you whether that's accurate. But many people believe that it's better to serve time in federal prison opposed to state prisons.
And these four suspects as well too, they face kind of the ultimate punishment. If they are convicted, they face the death penalty and then that mandatory minimum of life in prison. Are you surprised they're facing the death penalty in this case? And do you agree with this decision?
Well, this is a horrific crime if they're ultimately convicted and it's found that they did this. I mean, we're talking that somebody was kidnapped, they were murdered, and they were believed to possibly be tortured during that time. So, I mean, this is just horrific. So, no, I'm not surprised that they're facing that at all. Now, we need to keep in mind, though, since this is an organization, a lot of times when they arrest these lower level individuals, they will end up trying to work a deal to get more information about the organization and to try and get the people that are higher up that are really kind of running that organization.
And do you expect to see convictions from all the men, including the victim's husband in this case?
So, the allegations that have come out, if they prove them to be true, then he'll likely be convicted. And for money laundering, they have to prove that he basically agreed to, to move the money, knowing that it had been obtained from criminal activity. He doesn't need to know the specific criminal activity that is being done, but he needs to know that it was obtained from criminal activity, that he agreed to doing what he's doing knowing that, and he has to have an agreement because it's conspiracy. That's where you get the agreement part of it, because this isn't just that he committed the money laundering. There's a conspiracy, so he had to agree with someone else, and that's why I'm sure there's probably going to be more arrests in connection with this, as well as it's going to come out more information about that organization that they have indicated exists.
And another kind of aspect of this case that stood out to me was that the victim's husband was allegedly washing this money through cryptocurrency. Is that something that you've heard of before?
It is one of the concerns of the government for the use of cryptocurrency, because it's not, you can't track it. I mean, that's a pro and that's a con. I mean, the government thinks it's a con. A lot of other people would think it's a pro, but it's not trackable. So, in the past, when you had before cryptocurrency, you're talking about moving very large sums of money. I'm sure viewers have seen, movies where they have whole rooms with money stacked up. So this enables them, they're still moving, like you mentioned, the bag of money, but then it enables them to convert it to this cryptocurrency, which makes it very difficult for the government to track.
And how much of an uphill battle do you think that federal prosecutors will have in kind of laying out their case from kind of beginning to end, especially kind of with, that whole cryptocurrency aspect and possibly not being able to track it?
The federal government is very good at kind of piecing those puzzles together. They take time in doing it. It's not a knee-jerk reaction, and they put together a very organized case. And because of that, they do have a very high rate of conviction. Based on the allegations, and these are just allegations, obviously, based on the allegations that have come out, it appears that they have a very strong case. I'm going to assume they have other video surveillance. They probably have other people that have come in and said that this husband had some sort of connection that are willing to testify. And I also find it very strange that these individuals that allegedly murdered the wife just surrendered on their own. That's kind of interesting, which leads me to believe maybe that they had already kind of maybe retained an attorney, and there was some discussion about that they were going to provide information and try to work some deal. I don't know. This is all speculation, but it is unusual if you have committed a crime of this magnitude that you're just going to waltz into the police station and say, "Hi, by the way, this is what I just did. I heard you were looking for me." So I think there's some other things that haven't come out related to them doing that.
And I guess we'll have to wait and see, because I feel like with this case, there'll be new added layers probably in the months and weeks to come. Alexis Rosenberg, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate your analysis into this case.
Thank you for having me.
If all four men are convicted in Katherine Aguasvivas' murder, they face a minimum mandatory of life in prison or the death penalty. Meanwhile, Miguel Aguasvivas Lizardo remains behind bars in the Seminole County Jail. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.